You may be seated. Good morning, everyone, and good morning to those of you that are joining us online. I'm going to start off this morning with a small confession. I am addicted to British detective streaming movies and shows. And I know there's a few of you out there because we've exchanged ideas on which detective we like best. But one thing I've learned about these detective shows is that if there is a secret meeting, it is a significant point in the plot line in that show. Important things happen when secret meetings are arranged. And Nicodemus was having a secret meeting with Jesus. He came at night. He came alone. And Nicodemus was a Pharisee. He was not just any Pharisee. He was a higher up man. He had the Jewish law and the Jewish practice down pat. He was a leader of the people, a leader of the temple. He was really a top dog. And so for him to come talk to Jesus was truly a dangerous thing for him to do. Because the Pharisees had been working to try to trip up Jesus, prove to the people that he really wasn't of God, that he was teaching them wrong things. And so for Nicodemus to come and meet with Jesus, there was definitely something driving him to do that. I think Nicodemus was curious because he had been watching Jesus for a while, and he saw something that was very different from what he had known in the temple and among the teachers. He saw somebody that loved people, loved different types of people, hung out with different types of people, did all sorts of miracles, and he knew God was involved. He even said it to Jesus, "We know God is involved here." But he was really curious because Jesus was something he had never encountered before. And the very first thing Jesus says to him is, "You have to be born again." Mind blown, because that is not in the teachings. That is not what Nicodemus was used to hearing or teaching or talking about in the temple. This was an entirely new concept to him. And he even said it because he's like, "What do you mean? What do you mean? What are you talking about?" For me, when I read this passage, and I've heard it many times, the term born again brings an entirely different meaning to me. You see, I come from a very eclectic background. I was raised Catholic. I have participated in many different faith communities: Pentecostals, home teaching, Bible studies, Young Life, Baptists, Evangelicals, Lutherans. I've been around the block, okay? And many of those faith traditions hold this passage and the words, "You must be born again," as central to their faith. It took me back to 8th grade. Yes, I was that young at some point. Okay. So 8th grade, at that time, there was a religious movement sweeping across the nation called the Jesus Movement. I see some head shaking. You guys are familiar with that, yes. So the Jesus Movement is happening, and it was very focused on reaching young people to give their life to Christ, to become saved, to be born again. That was the purpose of that movement. And so in 8th grade, my girlfriends and I were invited to the Jesus People Church, which is at the University of the Minnesota campus. So we went there, and it was totally different from Catholic Mass. It was in a theater. It had a rock band, and I mean a rock band, okay? There was loud music, there was lights, there were people dancing and shouting and raising of arms. And then the pastor gave a very emotive, theatrical message. He was very, very hip. You're hip too. Just saying. But he was a little bit above you on theatrics. And it was a very emotional experience. I mean, by the end of the service, I was crying because his message was, if you are not born again, you will never make it to heaven. That is devastating news to an 8th grader. Okay? And so when the altar call came, we rushed that stage. We went up there and we met one-on-one with somebody to pray, and we prayed the Jesus prayer, crying, and at the end, the person I prayed with said to me these words, "You are now saved. You have been born again. You are going to heaven, and nothing can change that." Whew! What a relief for an 8th grader. Right? And so then, over the next few years, I really saw my focus was to get more people to do that Jesus prayer and get born again so that we all had a golden ticket to heaven. That was the goal. Everyone get your golden ticket. But with time, that wasn't enough. I'm like, well, I know I'm going to heaven, but I'm planning to be on earth for a few years. So what happens while we're on earth? What's supposed to happen here? How do I live if I believe in Jesus? How do I interact with people? What am I supposed to do besides just giving out golden tickets? So that is what started to drive me to learn more about Jesus, God, the Spirit, and how to live this life. Because we can get really stuck with a certain set of beliefs, and at some point, it's just not big enough anymore. We can get stuck with a certain set of practices, and we can feel like there's got to be something more here. And that's where Nicodemus was too. He knew that law inside and out. He had Jewish practice down pat, but it was no longer enough because Jesus was showing him something more. I kept looking for more emotional experiences, retreats, summer camp, special speaker, but none of them were filling that void about how to live this life. And I suspect Nicodemus was experiencing the same thing. Let me give you an example of being stuck, what that looks like for all of us. When Dan and I were first married, we lived in a one-bedroom apartment with very thin walls. And our son, Aaron, was about 6-7 months old. I have to get a drink for this one. Okay, so he was about 6-7 years old, wasn't crawling yet. But he had this one habit, and so I'd put him on a blanket in the middle of the living room floor with toys around him, like entertain yourself while I go do something. And he would roll across the floor until he found a wall. He would put his feet up on the wall, and then he would do that. And I would come running around the corner. I said, "You can't do that, because the lady upstairs will hear you. The guy downstairs is going to hear you. Mavis next door is going to hear you." So I'd pick him up and I'd flip him over the other way, hoping it would work, put him on his blanket, give him more toys. And I'd walk away, and 5 minutes later, this happened for weeks, people. Weeks. But at some point, Aaron saw something across the room that he was curious about, but he couldn't roll there because there was too many things in the way. So he taught himself how to crawl. And that was motivating to him, that curiosity. It opened up a whole new can of worms for me, but it was great for him. And I think that is something that has driven many of us here to this faith community. I think many of us at some point have felt stuck, or have had questions, or I have to reevaluate what I believe, or I've been away a long time and something is missing. I need something more. What does it look like to walk this life with Jesus? I need to find out more. See, we are all Nicodemus. We all have that hunger and that yearning in us to know more. And so be born again, when Jesus says be born again, he is not telling Nicodemus, oh, just add a little faith belief here, or add another spiritual practice here, or just try a retreat, see if you feel better. Jesus is talking about a radical reshaping of the heart. In Greek, that's called metanoia, the changing of the heart. Being born again is that deep sense of shifting to the Spirit and to Jesus and to God. It's a moment of reevaluating where I am and realigning with the Spirit, because it is the life with the Spirit that's going to teach us what we need to know. It's going to get us beyond kicking our feet on a wall. It's going to get us beyond our limited view of what God is and what this life is and expand it. So being born again is not a once and done. Being born again is moments along the path where we stop and pause and say, God, align my heart with you once more. That is what God is asking. And that is the radical shift that Jesus is asking Nicodemus to do. This Lent, during this time, I invite each of you to set up a secret meeting with Jesus. Set up a secret meeting with Jesus and ask Jesus where your heart is. Where does it need alignment? What do I need to learn from the Spirit? Where do we go from here, God, in our relationship? And I think if each of us are doing that this Lent, on the other side of when we get to Easter, it's a celebration because we've all experienced a shaping of our heart, being driven by the Spirit and letting our hearts be shaped by God to begin anew. Amen.